I am Amelia, 68 years old, and yesterday I threw my daughter's in-laws out of her farm. The farm I had worked my entire life to buy her. The farm that was supposed to be her sanctuary, her fresh start after an awful marriage. When I arrived for a visit, I found her crying in her own kitchen. The in-laws had moved in treating her like a servant, humiliating her daily. But not anymore. If you're watching this video, I'd love to know where you're from. Leave a comment below, subscribe if you've ever had to stand up for someone you love, and stay tuned for what happened when I finally said, enough is enough. My daughter Hannah has always been the light of my life. I raised her mostly on my own after her father left when she was just 8 years old. She grew into this incredible young woman, smart as a whip with a heart of gold. Hannah was always interested in agriculture and the environment, eventually getting her degree in environmental science with a focus on sustainable farming practices. I was so proud watching her graduate, the first in our family to get a college degree. But Hannah had one weakness that I blame myself for. Growing up without her father around, she developed this need for approval, especially from men. Her self-esteem wasn't what it should have been. I tried my best as a single mom working as a high school English teacher, but I know now I should have gotten her therapy to deal with the abandonment issues her father left behind. When Hannah met James at 27, I was cautiously optimistic. He was 31, then came from a wealthy family and worked in finance. He was handsome, charming, and seemed to adore Hannah, but mothers have intuition, and something about him never sat quite right with me. Still, Hannah was happy, so I kept my concerns to myself. They married after dating for a year. The wedding was elaborate, paid for entirely by his parents, Patricia and Arthur. That was the first time I really got to know them, and honestly, I should have spoken up then. Patricia spent the entire wedding planning process undermining Hannah's choices from the flowers to the dress. Arthur barely acknowledged Hannah except to make jokes about how James was marrying down, but that her farm girl muscles would produce fine grandchildren. I remember pulling Hannah aside the night before the wedding, asking if she was sure about marrying into this family. She just squeezed my hand and said, "They're just old-fashioned, Mom. James isn't like them. He loves me for who I am." For the first couple years, things seemed okay on the surface. Hannah and James bought a house in the suburbs. She got a job with an environmental consulting firm, and he continued climbing the corporate ladder. But each time I visited, I noticed Hannah becoming quieter, deferring to James on decisions, checking his reaction before she would even answer simple questions like what restaurant she wanted to go to. The real trouble started when they began trying for a baby. After a year of trying, Hannah finally got pregnant. She was ecstatic. James seemed happy too in his reserved way. But at 4 months, Hannah had a miscarriage. She was devastated. James's response was to tell her they'd try again, then he left for a business trip 3 days later. Patricia called Hannah daily, not to comfort her, but to give unsolicited advice about what Hannah must have done wrong to lose the baby. Hannah never got pregnant again. The doctors couldn't find anything specifically wrong, but the stress of trying, the monthly disappointment, it all took a toll on their marriage. James became more distant, more critical. He started working later, taking more business trips. Hannah quit her job at the consulting firm because James thought it was too stressful and might be affecting her ability to conceive. Instead, she started gardening at home, eventually turning their backyard into this beautiful, productive space. It was the only time I saw her truly happy anymore. By their 5th anniversary, Hannah called me in tears. She had found text messages between James and a coworker. He wasn't even particularly careful about hiding the affair. When confronted, he blamed Hannah. If she had given him children, if she wasn't so obsessed with her dirt hobby, if she made more effort with his family, maybe he wouldn't have had to look elsewhere. I wanted her to leave him then, but she wasn't ready. She believed she could fix things, that it was somehow her fault. That broke my heart. Around this time, I was approaching retirement after 40 years of teaching. I had saved carefully all my life, lived modestly in the same small house since Hannah was a child. I had a decent pension coming, and a good chunk of savings that I'd always planned to use for traveling after retirement. But watching my daughter's spirit being crushed day by day, I decided to use that money differently. I started looking for properties within a couple hours' drive from my home. I wanted something with good land in a nice community, but that needed enough work to be affordable. After 3 months of searching, I found it 20 acres with an old farmhouse about 15 miles outside a charming small town in rural Pennsylvania. The house needed work, and the land had been neglected, but the bones were good, the soil was rich, and it had a year-round creek running through the back field. I bought it outright and spent the next 6 months working with local contractors to renovate the house and outbuildings. I had the soil tested, put in proper irrigation, and even started some raised beds. I kept it all secret from Hannah, wanting it to be a surprise, a gift that could change her life. When everything was ready, I invited Hannah to come see my retirement project. She arrived alone, James too busy with work to join for what he called Mom's country fantasy. When we pulled up the long drive, and she saw the little farm all fixed up with a new red barn and white fence, she was confused. "Mom, when did you decide to become a farmer?" she asked, laughing for the first time in months. "I didn't," I told her and handed her the deed with her name on it. "But you did a long time ago." Hannah stood there staring at the paper, then at the farm, then back at me. "I don't understand." "It's yours, honey. All of it. The house, the land, everything. Your chance to start over to build something that's entirely yours." She burst into tears, saying she couldn't accept such a gift, that she couldn't leave James, that they were working on things. I told her she didn't have to decide anything right away. The farm would be here when she was ready. It took another 6 months and catching James in a second affair before Hannah finally agreed to a divorce. James fought it initially, especially when he learned about the farm. Suddenly, he was interested in reconciliation and couples therapy, in starting fresh, on that cute little hobby farm. But thankfully, Hannah had started individual therapy by then and was beginning to see his manipulation for what it was. The divorce was finalized 3 months ago. James got the house in the suburbs, which was fine, since it was mostly his money that had paid for it anyway. Hannah moved to the farm immediately after. We talked weekly, and she sounded better with each call. She was planning her first plantings, had joined the local agricultural association, and was even making friends with neighboring farmers. I had planned to visit soon anyway, to help her settle in and see her progress with the spring planting. I had no idea what I would find when I arrived, or that my visit would turn into the confrontation that changed everything. The day I drove to Hannah's farm was one of those perfect early summer days that seemed to stretch out forever. The sky was a deep clear blue with just a few wispy clouds, and the countryside was vibrant green and bursting with life. I felt excited driving those country roads, eager to see how Hannah was settling into her new beginning. I had texted her that morning saying I'd be arriving around 2 in the afternoon, but she hadn't responded. I wasn't worried, figuring she was probably busy outside with farm work and had left her phone in the house. Hannah had given me a key when she moved in, insisting that as the person who made it all possible, I should always feel free to come and go. As I turned onto the long gravel driveway leading to the farmhouse, I immediately noticed something odd. There were 3 cars parked near the house that I didn't recognize: a sleek black Mercedes SUV, a silver BMW convertible, and a red Audi sports car. All luxury vehicles that seemed out of place at the modest farm. My first thought was that Hannah must have company, perhaps neighbors or new friends from town. I parked my sensible Toyota beside these expensive cars and made my way to the front door. I knocked, but there was no answer. After waiting a moment, I used my key and called out as I entered. "Hannah, it's Mom. Sorry to let myself in, but I knocked, and—" My voice trailed off as I heard voices coming from the kitchen at the back of the house. One was definitely Hannah's, but it sounded strained. There were other voices too, a woman's sharp tone rising above the others. I made my way through the living room, noticing subtle changes since my last visit. There were expensive-looking throw pillows that didn't match Hannah's style, crystal decanters on the sideboard that definitely weren't hers, and men's shoes by the couch. When I reached the kitchen doorway, I froze at the scene before me. Hannah was standing at the counter, knife in hand, chopping vegetables with tears streaming down her face. Her shoulders were hunched, and she looked smaller, somehow diminished. Around the kitchen's large island stood 4 people who I recognized immediately, though I'd hoped never to see them again. Patricia James's mother was standing right next to Hannah, pointing at the vegetables and saying, "Thinner slices, Hannah. I've told you repeatedly that proper crudités require uniformity. This looks like something a child would prepare." Arthur James's father was seated at the island with papers spread out before him, talking loudly into a cell phone about stock options and quarterly projections, completely ignoring the tension around him. Stephanie James's sister was leaning against the refrigerator, scrolling through her phone and occasionally sighing dramatically. "Is the Wi-Fi always this pathetic out here?" she complained to no one in particular. And there was James himself, looking as polished and detached as ever, watching his mother criticize Hannah with a small, satisfied smile. None of them noticed me at first, giving me a moment to take in this shocking tableau. Hannah looked up and saw me, her eyes widening in a mixture of embarrassment and relief. "Mom!" she exclaimed, putting down the knife and wiping her eyes quickly with the back of her hand. "I'm so sorry, I meant to text you back, but it's been so busy here with everyone visiting." That got the attention of the others, who all turned to look at me with varying degrees of surprise and displeasure. Patricia recovered first, her perfectly made-up face arranging itself into a smile that never reached her eyes. "Amelia, what a surprise. Hannah didn't mention you were coming today." "I texted this morning," I said, still trying to make sense of what I was seeing. "What I'm wondering is what all of you are doing here." James stepped forward, all charm. "Amelia, good to see you. We're just having a little family reunion. Dad had business nearby, and we thought it would be nice to all come stay for a while, enjoy the country air." "Day?" I repeated, looking at Hannah, who wouldn't meet my eyes. "Yes," Patricia said, waving her hand dismissively. "We arrived 3 days ago. We'll be here for the summer. Arthur needs the break from city stress, and the country is so nice this time of year, despite the bugs and lack of decent shopping." Hannah finally spoke up, her voice quiet. "They surprised me. Just showed up with their luggage." "Hannah's been so gracious," Patricia continued, though her tone suggested the opposite. "Though the accommodations are a bit rustic for what we're used to. But we're making do, aren't we, Arthur?" Arthur grunted without looking up from his papers. I was speechless. These people had invaded Hannah's new home, the place that was supposed to be her sanctuary, and from the look of things were treating her like their personal servant. "Well," I said, keeping my voice even with effort, "I'm here now too. Hannah, why don't you show me to my room so I can freshen up after the drive?" Hannah looked relieved to have an excuse to leave the kitchen. As we walked upstairs, I heard Patricia call after us. "Hannah, don't forget we're expecting a proper dinner at 7. Arthur's been looking forward to a rack of lamb, and you know he hates to be disappointed." Once we were alone in the guest bedroom, Hannah broke down. Between sobs, she explained that the Thompsons had simply arrived unannounced 3 days ago, claiming they had always planned a family vacation at the country house. James still had a key from when he had helped Hannah move in, and they had used it to let themselves in while Hannah was working in the fields. "They just assumed they could stay," Hannah whispered. "Patricia took over the master bedroom, said it had the best view. They brought so much luggage, Mom, like they're moving in, not visiting. And you didn't tell them to leave?" I asked, trying to keep the judgment out of my voice. Hannah looked down at her hands. "I tried, sort of. But Patricia said family is always welcome, and James said he still had things here anyway, so it made sense for him to stay too. I didn't know how to make them go without causing a scene." In that moment, I saw that despite the divorce, despite therapy, Despite the physical distance, Hannah was still under their influence, still afraid to stand up to these people who had spent years undermining her confidence. "Well," I said, unpacking my suitcase with deliberate calm, "I'm here now. Let's see how things unfold." What I didn't tell Hannah was that I had already decided these people would be gone from her farm before the week was out one way or another. But first, I wanted to observe to understand exactly what we were dealing with. Hannah had escaped the marriage, but she clearly hadn't escaped their psychological hold. That would end now. I decided to stay and watch how the in-laws interacted with Hannah over the next few days. I told Hannah I was there for her, but wanted her to take the lead on handling the situation. In reality, I was gathering evidence, building my case, and planning my strategy. I've always been methodical that way. 40 years of teaching high school English teaches you patience and timing. The first night's dinner was illuminating. Hannah had indeed prepared rack of lamb, along with roasted vegetables, fresh bread, and a salad with greens from her garden. It was a beautiful meal that must have taken hours to prepare. Patricia took one bite of the lamb and frowned. "It's a bit overdone for my taste," she said, putting down her fork. "I prefer mine much rarer. Perhaps next time you could prepare mine separately." Hannah apologized immediately. I noticed how she hunched her shoulders when Patricia spoke a physical manifestation of making herself smaller. Arthur barely acknowledged the food eating while continuing to work on his laptop at the table. At one point, he asked, "Is there wine?" "Something decent, I hope. A Bordeaux would pair well." Hannah jumped up to fetch wine, explaining that she only had a local red from a nearby vineyard. Arthur snorted in derision, but accepted a glass anyway. Stephanie picked at her food while complaining about the lack of nightlife in the area. "Seriously, what do people do for fun around here? Watch corn grow?" James ate heartily, complimenting the food in a way that somehow still sounded condescending. "This is actually quite good, Hannah. You always did have a knack for homey cooking." Throughout the meal, I observed how they all treated Hannah like staff rather than family. No one offered to help with serving or clearing. They made requests as if at a restaurant. Not once did they ask Hannah about her day or her work on the farm. After dinner, Hannah cleaned up alone while the Thompsons retired to the living room, where Patricia immediately began critiquing the decor. "These curtains are dreadful," I overheard her telling Stephanie. "So provincial. I'm thinking silk panels would elevate the space. James reminded me to take measurements tomorrow. We can order something suitable online." The next morning revealed more troubling behavior. Patricia took it upon herself to reorganize Hannah's kitchen cabinets without asking. "Your system made no sense, dear," she said when Hannah discovered the chaos. "This is how a proper kitchen should be organized." Arthur had commandeered the small office Hannah had set up in the sunroom, spreading his papers everywhere and conducting loud business calls all day. When Hannah needed to access her farm planning documents stored there, he waved her away irritably. "Can't you see I'm working? Whatever farm hobby stuff you need can wait." Stephanie spent the day lounging by the small pool Hannah had installed, inviting friends over without asking permission. These friends, as entitled as Stephanie, left wet towels everywhere and tracked mud through the house. When Hannah gently asked them to be careful of the hardwood floors, Stephanie rolled her eyes and said, "God, Hannah, don't be such a killjoy. It's just a little dirt. Isn't that your thing anyway?" But James was perhaps the most insidious. He followed Hannah around the property, making suggestions about improvements, as if the place were still partly his. He touched her casually, standing too close, reminiscing about their marriage in ways that made Hannah visibly uncomfortable. "Remember how we talked about raising horses someday?" he said as they walked past the empty paddock. "That dream could still happen, you know. We had good times, Hannah. Everyone makes mistakes." By the third day, I was having trouble maintaining my composure. I watched Hannah become increasingly withdrawn, reverting to the timid approval-seeking behavior that characterized her worst days in the marriage. She was up at dawn working in the fields until the family woke, then spending the rest of the day catering to their demands. She prepared 3 meals a day, to their specifications, cleaned up after them, and tried desperately to anticipate their needs to avoid criticism. That evening, Hannah broke down in my room after another tense dinner, where Patricia had criticized everything from Hannah's choice of dinnerware to her posture. "They've always been like this," she confessed, tears streaming down her face. "Even when James and I were married, I was never good enough, not sophisticated enough, not ambitious enough, not the right background. Patricia would redecorate our house when we were away. Arthur would lecture me about investing money I didn't have. Stephanie would borrow my clothes and return them ruined." "And James?" I asked gently. "James would say he defended me behind closed doors, but he never did it in front of them. He'd let them treat me this way, then tell me I was being too sensitive when I got upset." Hannah looked up at me, her eyes red from crying. "I thought getting divorced would free me from them, but they've followed me here to the one place that was supposed to be just mine." I held my daughter as she cried, thinking about all the times I should have intervened during her marriage, but didn't, respecting her independence as an adult. I had given her space to make her own decisions, her own mistakes. But watching these people systematically tear down the confidence she'd been rebuilding since the divorce, I knew it was time to act. "Try to get some sleep," I told her. "Things will look different tomorrow." Little did I know how prophetic those words would be, or that the next day would bring the final straw that would push me to take decisive action. The morning of the 4th day, I woke early and went downstairs to make coffee, trying to beat Patricia to the kitchen, so Hannah wouldn't have to endure more criticism about how she brewed it too weak or too strong, depending on Patricia's mood. As I approached the office, I heard papers rustling. Peering through the partially open door, I saw Patricia going through Hannah's desk, pulling out folders and examining documents. I pushed the door open. "Can I help you find something?" Patricia didn't even have the grace to look embarrassed at being caught snooping. "Just familiarizing myself with the farm finances," she said breezily. "Hannah's never had a head for numbers. I thought I'd offer some guidance." "Those are private documents," I said, keeping my voice level. "I'm sure Hannah would appreciate you asking before going through her things." Patricia waved a dismissive hand. "We're family. There's no need for such formalities." I was about to respond when Arthur's booming voice came from the living room as he spoke on his phone. "Yes, we'll have plenty of room for everyone. Planning a small corporate retreat at our country place. 6 executives, 3 days next month. The wife will handle all the catering and accommodations." The wife. He was referring to Hannah planning to use her home and labor for his business without even consulting her. Before I could confront him, I spotted Stephanie through the window. She was lounging on a beach towel placed directly on top of Hannah's newly planted herb garden, crushing the fragile seedlings. A half-empty wine glass tilted precariously near her hand. I went outside, careful to control my growing anger. "Stephanie, you might not have noticed, but you're lying on Hannah's herbs." She barely looked up from her phone. "Oh, is that what these are? I thought it was just weeds. Anyway, it's the only spot that gets full sun at this hour." As I was considering how to respond to this staggering selfishness, James appeared from around the barn, walking with Hannah. They were deep in conversation, or rather James was talking and Hannah was listening with that familiar, anxious expression. "The thing is," I overheard him saying, "the farm has so much potential, but you're thinking too small. Organic vegetables for the local farmers market? That's a hobby, not a business. With my connections, we could turn this into a real enterprise. Weekend retreats for executives' farm-to-table experiences, maybe even a small wedding venue." "But that's not what I want," Hannah said quietly. "I want a simple life. Growing food, selling at markets, maybe teaching workshops on sustainable agriculture." James laughed that condescending chuckle I'd grown to hate. "And that's why you've always needed my guidance. You don't think big enough." He put his arm around her shoulders. "We made a good team once. We could again. I've been thinking a lot about us lately." Hannah stiffened, but didn't push his arm away. "James, we're divorced." Papers can be torn up. People make mistakes. I'm willing to forgive how you rushed the divorce. He gestured broadly at the farm. This place could be a new start for us. Mom and Dad already love it here. I slipped away before they noticed me, my blood boiling. Back in the house, I found Hannah's prized family quilt, the one my mother had made spread on the ground near the back door like a doormat. It was stained with what looked like mud and wine. While trying to clean the quilt, I overheard Patricia on the phone in the next room. Yes, the contractor can come next week. The kitchen needs a complete overhaul. It's terribly outdated. No, don't worry about Hannah. She'll agree to whatever improvements we suggest. She always does. They were planning renovations to Hannah's house without her permission. This wasn't just a visit. It was an invasion, a takeover. The final revelation came when I went to borrow Hannah's truck to get groceries, only to find Arthur had taken it without asking. When he returned an hour later, the truck had a new dent in the fender. "Narrow country roads," was all he said by way of explanation or apology. I was in the pantry looking for something to prepare for lunch when I overheard Patricia, Arthur, and James talking in the dining room, unaware of my presence. "She's wearing down faster than I expected," Patricia was saying. "Did you see how she didn't even object when I mentioned replacing the kitchen cabinets?" "Hannah's always been easily managed," Arthur replied. "The divorce was an act of rebellion, but she's reverting to form nicely. Another few weeks and she'll be begging for help running this place. And then we suggest she sign over partial ownership to James in exchange for financial support," Patricia continued. "The location is perfect for the weekend retreat business we've been discussing. 10 minutes from the golf course picturesque setting." "Are you sure this is the best approach?" James asked, though he sounded more concerned about efficiency than ethics. "Couldn't I just charm her back? It might be faster." Arthur snorted. "Your charm is what got us into this mess. No, this is better. Break her down, build her back up in the way we want. By summer's end, this farm will be effectively ours, with Hannah doing all the physical labor while we reap the benefits." "She never deserved you or this property," Patricia said. A girl from her background teaching high school was the height of achievement in her family. She should be grateful we're still willing to include her at all, after how she humiliated you with that divorce. "Don't worry," James said, his voice cold in a way I'd never heard before. "I always wanted this property. The land alone is worth 3 times what her mother paid for it with the new highway coming through. Hannah's just the means to an end." I stood frozen in the pantry, a can of soup clutched in my hand so tightly my fingers hurt. This wasn't just rudeness or entitlement. This was calculated psychological warfare. They were deliberately trying to break Hannah's spirit to gain control of her property and her life. In that moment, I made my decision. These people needed to leave. Today. And I would be the one to make it happen. I took a few minutes to collect myself to calm the rage that threatened to overwhelm my better judgment. As a teacher, I had learned that the most effective discipline comes from a place of controlled authority, not unbridled emotion. I needed to be strategic. First, I texted Sheriff Miller, who had become a friend during the farm renovation. I had helped his daughter improve her college application essays, and he had kept an eye on the property before Hannah moved in. I explained the situation briefly and asked if he could stop by in about an hour for a check-in that would coincidentally coincide with the Thompsons' departure. Next, I retrieved the property documents from my suitcase. When I had purchased the farm for Hannah, I had taken certain precautions. The deed was in Hannah's name, but I held the mortgage with specific provisions regarding occupancy and use of the property. I had also drawn up a simple co-tenancy agreement that Hannah and I had signed, giving me certain rights regarding the property, despite it being in her name. It was meant as protection for both of us during the transition, but now it would serve another purpose. Armed with these documents, I walked calmly into the dining room where the Thompsons were still discussing their plans for taking over Hannah's farm. They fell silent when I entered, exchanging glances. "Amelia," Patricia said with false warmth. "We were just discussing some improvements to the property. Hannah's place has such potential." "I'm sure you were," I replied, sitting down at the head of the table, a position Arthur had claimed since their arrival. "And I'm afraid that's a conversation that needs to end right now." Hannah entered from the kitchen, looking confused at the sudden tension in the room. "Mom, is everything okay?" "It will be," I assured her, then turned back to the Thompsons. "I've just overheard your entire conversation. Your plans to wear Hannah down to manipulate her into giving up control of her property, and James's admission that he only wants the farm for its value." Patricia's perfectly composed face flickered with surprise before settling into indignation. "I don't know what you think you heard, but you're clearly mistaken. We're family having a private discussion about helping Hannah succeed." "Save it," I said, holding up my hand. I heard every word, and so did my phone's recording app. This was a bluff, but from their expressions, an effective one. "Now I need all of you to pack your things and leave this property immediately." There was a moment of stunned silence before they all started speaking at once. "This is ridiculous! How dare you!" "You have no right." I waited for them to quiet down. "Actually, I have every right. While the farm is in Hannah's name, I hold the mortgage, and we have a legal co-tenancy agreement." I placed the documents on the table. "This agreement specifically gives me the authority to remove unwanted guests in the event they pose a risk to the property or its primary residents' well-being." Arthur, ever the businessman, pulled the papers toward him and scanned them quickly. His face darkened. "This is just some amateur legal nonsense. It wouldn't hold up in court." "Perhaps not," I conceded. "But it will certainly hold up long enough for a formal eviction process, during which time you'd be barred from the property. Or you can leave now voluntarily, and we can all avoid the public embarrassment of legal proceedings." James leaned forward, adopting the charming tone he had always used to get his way. "Amelia, let's be reasonable. We're all adults here. Surely we can come to some arrangement that benefits everyone. Hannah and I have history, a connection." "A connection you severed when you cheated on her, blamed her for your failures, and then tried to manipulate her into giving you her property," I replied coldly. "There is no arrangement to be made. You need to leave." Hannah, who had been standing silently by the door, finally spoke up. "They should go, Mom. I don't want them here anymore." Her voice trembled but grew stronger with each word. "This is my home. I never invited you to stay here, any of you. You just showed up and took over like you always have." Patricia turned to Hannah, her expression hardening. "After everything we've done for you, taking you into our family despite your obvious unsuitability, this is how you repay our generosity." "Generosity?" Hannah laughed, a sound I hadn't heard in days. "Is that what you call criticizing everything I do? Rearranging my home without permission? Planning to steal my property? That's not generosity, Patricia. That's abuse." I felt a surge of pride hearing Hannah stand up for herself, finally naming the treatment she had endured for years. "I want you all out." Hannah continued, her confidence visibly growing. "Now, today, and I don't want you to come back." Arthur stood up, attempting to use his height to intimidate. "This is absurd. We've invested in this property. James left belongings here. We have rights." "Actually, you don't," I said, standing as well. "You have no lease, no agreement, no invitation. You are unwelcome guests who have outstayed your non-existent welcome. As for James's belongings, anything left behind after your divorce should have been retrieved months ago. Whatever is still here can be shipped to you." Stephanie, who had been unusually quiet, finally spoke up. "This is so dramatic." "We were just trying to help. Hannah clearly can't manage this place on her own." I've been managing just fine until you all showed up, Hannah retorted. My first growing season is on track. I've joined the local farming co-op. I've already been invited to sell at 2 farmers markets. I don't need or want your help. I glanced at my watch. Sheriff Miller will be here in about 45 minutes for a friendly visit. I suggest you be gone by then. If not, I'll have to explain the situation to him, and he takes trespassing very seriously in this county. That finally broke through their entitlement. The mention of law enforcement of public embarrassment was something the image-conscious Thompsons couldn't tolerate. This is outrageous, Patricia sputtered, but she was already standing, straightening her expensive blouse. Come, Arthur. If they don't appreciate our presence, we certainly won't impose. James, Stephanie, we're leaving. The next 30 minutes were a flurry of activity as the Thompsons hastily packed their numerous suitcases and belongings. Hannah and I stood firm, supervising to ensure they didn't take anything that wasn't theirs. James made several attempts to speak to Hannah alone, but she refused staying by my side. Patricia made a point of leaving the kitchen in disarray, deliberately knocking over a container of flour as she left. Arthur took all the liquor he had brought, plus a bottle of Hannah's special occasion whiskey. Stephanie accidentally knocked over a potted plant by the door. These petty acts of revenge only confirmed we were making the right decision. Finally, they were all outside their luxury cars loaded with luggage. Patricia made one last attempt to assert control. At least let me back in to get my cashmere sweater from the guest room, she demanded. It's Burberry and cost more than most of the furniture in this place. No, I said, simply standing in the doorway. Your time's up. You can't be serious. My clothes, my personal belongings. I'll mail anything we find, Hannah said, her voice steady now. To the house, the one where you actually live. Patricia's face contorted with rage. You'll regret this, both of you. We were trying to help you make something of this pathetic little farm. You'll fail within a year without us. I looked at her, this woman who had tormented my daughter for years, and felt nothing but pity. Goodbye, Patricia, I said, and closed the door firmly. Through the window, we watched as they argued among themselves in the driveway before finally getting into their expensive cars and driving away, gravel spitting from their tires in a final show of petulance. As the sound of their engines faded, Hannah turned to me, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock relief and lingering fear. Did we really just do that? Will they come back? I put my arm around her shoulders. We really did. And they might try, but now you know you have the strength to send them away again. I gestured to the now quiet house. This is your home, Hannah, yours alone, and you get to decide who's welcome in it. For the first time in days, Hannah smiled a real, unguarded smile. Then, in a move that surprised me, she walked to the front door, stepped outside onto the porch, and took a deep breath of the clean country air. It already feels different, she said. Lighter, somehow. I nodded, watching my daughter reclaim her space, and more importantly, her power. The Thompsons had been evicted not just from the farmhouse, but from their position of authority over Hannah's life. It was the first day of her true independence, and I couldn't have been prouder. The immediate aftermath of the Thompsons' departure was like the calm after a storm. Hannah and I stood in the suddenly quiet house, almost disbelieving the peace that had descended. Then, without discussing it, we both started cleaning. We began in the kitchen, scrubbing away the flour that Patricia had spilled, reorganizing the cabinets back to Hannah's preferred system. We worked methodically through each room, removing traces of the Thompsons' presence, reclaiming the space. I can't believe how much damage they did in just 4 days, Hannah said as we stripped the beds in the guest rooms. It's like they were marking their territory, changing things just to show they could. We found evidence of their entitled behavior everywhere, cigarette burns on the windowsill from Stephanie's smoking, despite Hannah's no-smoking rule. Arthur's business papers shoved into Hannah's farm accounting files. Patricia's interior design magazines with pages folded down and notes in the margins about what she planned to change. Most distressing was finding Hannah's family photos that had been displayed on the mantel, now hidden in a drawer, replaced by framed pictures of the Thompsons that they had brought with them. It was such a blatant symbolic erasure of Hannah's identity that it brought tears to her eyes. "They were doing this from the moment they arrived," she said quietly, holding the photo of us at her college graduation. "Little things at first, then bigger ones, like they were trying to erase me from my own home." "That's exactly what they were doing," I confirmed, finally able to be completely honest now that the danger had passed. "I overheard them. It was a deliberate strategy to make you doubt yourself, to make you feel like a guest in your own home, so you'd be more likely to give in to their demands." Sheriff Miller stopped by as promised. I had texted him that the situation was resolved, but he came anyway, concerned about Hannah's well-being. He was a kind man in his 50s who had become something of a friend during the farm renovation. "Everything okay here, ladies?" he asked, declining our offer of coffee but accepting a slice of apple pie. I let Hannah explain what had happened, watching her grow more confident as she articulated the invasion and manipulation she had experienced. Sheriff Miller listened attentively, occasionally asking clarifying questions. "They didn't threaten you physically at any point," he confirmed. "No," Hannah said. "It was all psychological, I guess, making me feel like I couldn't say no, like I was wrong for wanting my own space." The sheriff nodded thoughtfully. "Unfortunately, I've seen this kind of family dynamic before. People who can't respect boundaries, who think their wants override others' needs." He took out a card and handed it to Hannah. "If they come back or cause any trouble, you call me directly, day or night." After he left, Hannah turned to me with tears in her eyes. "Why couldn't I stand up to them before? Why did it take you being here?" We moved to the porch swing, sitting side by side as the afternoon sun bathed the farm in golden light. It was time for the conversation we should have had years ago. "Hannah, what happened to you with James and his family? It didn't happen overnight. It was years of subtle undermining, of making you doubt yourself. That kind of emotional abuse is insidious. It creeps in slowly until you don't trust your own instincts anymore." "But I should have been stronger," she insisted. "I let them walk all over me. Even after the divorce, even when I had this fresh start, I still let them in." I took her hand. "Healing isn't linear, honey, and you did stand up to them today. You found your voice when it mattered most." We spent the rest of the afternoon and evening talking more openly than we ever had before. Hannah shared details of her marriage that she had previously kept hidden, how James would criticize her under the guise of helping her improve, how he would share private details of their relationship with his parents, how he would withdraw affection if she didn't comply with his wishes. After the miscarriage, he told his mother, before he told me, that the doctors said we might have trouble conceiving again. Hannah revealed tears streaming down her face. "Patricia called to tell me I'd failed at the most basic female function before I'd even processed the news myself." I shared my own regrets too. "I should have intervened earlier. I saw what was happening but told myself it wasn't my place, that you were an adult who needed to make your own choices." "You gave me this farm," Hannah pointed out. "That was intervening in the best possible way. But I should have been more direct about the emotional abuse I was seeing. I was so afraid of seeming controlling or driving you away that I didn't say what needed to be said." As night fell, we moved inside and continued talking by the fireplace, unpacking years of unspoken thoughts and feelings. It was painful, but cathartic, like lancing a wound to allow healing to begin. "I was like the frog in the pot of slowly heating water," Hannah mused. "I didn't realize how bad things had gotten because it happened so gradually. Each individual thing seemed manageable, but together they were destroying you," I finished. "But you got out. You recognized what was happening and took steps to change it, even if those steps were sometimes hesitant." Hannah nodded slowly. And now, I need to learn how to prevent it from happening again. The next morning, Hannah seemed different somehow. She moved with more purpose, held herself taller. We spent the day working together on the farm, physical labor that felt cleansing after the emotional intensity of the previous days. Hannah showed me her vegetable fields, the irrigation system she had designed, the composting setup she had built. She spoke with knowledge and passion about her plans for each season, the crops she would rotate, the sustainable practices she was implementing. The Northeast Organic Farming Association is having their summer conference next month, she told me as we harvested early lettuce. I've signed up for workshops on pest management and soil health. There are several other new farmers in the area who want to carpool together. I noticed she mentioned names I hadn't heard before: Danny, who ran the apple orchard down the road, Miguel, who specialized in heirloom tomatoes, Sarah, who kept bees and sold honey at the farmer's market. These were friends Hannah had made on her own connections she had established in her new community. James used to discourage me from making friends without him, Hannah admitted as we washed vegetables for dinner. He said my social awkwardness embarrassed him, so it was better if we only socialized as a couple with his friends and colleagues. After a while, I believed I was bad at relating to people. And now? I prompted. She smiled, a genuine expression that reached her eyes. Now I'm discovering that I actually like people, and they seem to like me. Especially when I'm just being myself, not trying to live up to impossible standards. The week continued in this pattern of work and healing. Each day, Hannah seemed to reclaim another piece of herself. She started wearing clothes James had criticized as too casual or unflattering. She played music Patricia had dismissed as common. She rearranged furniture to suit her own preferences rather than some arbitrary standard of design. We had one moment of crisis when James returned alone 5 days after the group eviction. Hannah was working in the greenhouse when his car pulled up. I watched from the kitchen window as she straightened her shoulders and went out to meet him, stopping him before he could even reach the porch. I couldn't hear what was said, but I could see their body language. James leaning in, gesturing emphatically, occasionally reaching for Hannah. Hannah standing firm, arms crossed, maintaining distance. After about 15 minutes, James threw up his hands in frustration, got back in his car, and drove away. Hannah came inside looking shaken, but proud. He said he'd left Patricia and Arthur at a hotel because they were too confrontational. He claimed he just wanted to talk, to work things out between us. He brought flowers. She laughed bitterly. Lilies. I'm allergic to lilies. We were married for 7 years and he still doesn't know that. What did you tell him? I asked. I told him there was nothing to work out, that our relationship was over, and that he wasn't welcome at my home anymore. He kept saying, our home and our farm, and I kept correcting him. He didn't like that. I hugged her tightly. I'm so proud of you. Hannah pulled back, looking somewhat surprised. You know I'm proud of me too. A month ago, I would have let him in, listened to his excuses, maybe even believed them. Today, I just felt tired of it, tired of the manipulation, tired of doubting myself. That evening, Hannah made a decision about the farm without consulting me or anyone else. She decided to convert one of the outbuildings into a small event space for educational workshops on sustainable agriculture. I was thinking about what James said about making the farm profitable, she explained over dinner. He wasn't entirely wrong about that, just about the how. I don't want corporate retreats or weddings, but I do want to share what I'm learning with others, especially kids from the city who never get to see where food comes from. It was a perfect example of Hannah taking back her power, filtering others' opinions through her own values rather than simply accepting or rejecting them wholesale. She was finding her balance, her voice. As my visit drew to a close, I found myself marveling at my daughter's resilience. The farm had indeed given her a fresh start, but the real transformation had come from within. She had faced her abusers, named their behavior for what it was, and reclaimed her space and her dignity. The night before I left, we sat on the porch watching fireflies emerge in the twilight. Do you think they'll try to come back again? Hannah asked. They might, I admitted. People like that don't give up easily on something they want. Hannah nodded thoughtfully. I used to be so afraid of their disapproval of conflict, but now I think I'm more afraid of losing myself again. She turned to me, her expression serious. Thank you, Mom. Not just for the farm, but for showing me how to defend my boundaries. You did the hard part, I told her truthfully. You found the courage to stand up for yourself, to say no to people who have been controlling you for years. That takes real strength. As we sat in comfortable silence, I realized that the farm had turned out to be exactly what I had hoped. Not just a place for Hannah to live and work, but a place for her to heal and grow into her full self. And I had been privileged to witness the beginning of that journey. 6 months after the dramatic eviction of the Thompsons, I returned to Hannah's farm for a longer visit. It was early winter now, the growing season over the landscape transformed by a light dusting of snow that made everything look pristine and peaceful. The difference in both the farm and in Hannah herself was remarkable. As I drove up the long driveway, I could see physical changes to the property. The barn had been painted a cheerful red with white trim. New fencing enclosed an expanded garden area. A sign at the entrance read, Wildflower Farm, Sustainable Agriculture and Education. Hannah greeted me with a warm hug, and I immediately noticed how different she looked. Her posture was straight and confident, her face relaxed and tanned from outdoor work. She had let her hair grow longer and curly the way she had worn it in college before James had insisted she maintain a more professional appearance with a straight shortcut. Mom, perfect timing. I just pulled fresh bread from the oven, she said, leading me inside. The farmhouse interior had changed too. Gone were the few remaining touches of Patricia's influence. The space was now wholly Hannah's, with comfortable furniture arranged for conversation rather than show walls painted in warm, earthy tones and shelves filled with books on farming ecology and sustainability. Fresh flowers from her greenhouse brightened the winter rooms, and the smell of baking filled the air. Over dinner that evening, Hannah proudly updated me on the farm's progress. The first growing season exceeded all my projections, she said, serving homemade vegetable soup. I've got regular spots at 2 farmers markets now, and I've started a small CSA program with 15 local families. That's wonderful, I said sincerely. And the educational workshops you were planning? Hannah's face lit up. They've been amazing. I partnered with an after-school program in the city to bring kids out twice a month. We teach them about growing food composting the whole seed-to-table process. You should see their faces when they pull their first carrot from the ground. As she talked, I noticed an ease about her that had been missing for years. She spoke with authority about her work, didn't second-guess herself, didn't apologize for her enthusiasm or knowledge. This was the Hannah I had glimpsed occasionally before her marriage now fully emerged. And personally, I asked gently, how are you doing with everything else? Hannah's expression grew more serious, but remained steady. It's been a journey. I started therapy with a counselor who specializes in emotional abuse recovery. It's been hard work unpacking everything that happened with James and his family, recognizing patterns I didn't see before. She took a sip of her tea before continuing. The hardest part has been accepting that it wasn't my fault, that I didn't somehow invite their treatment by being too weak or too accommodating. Dr. Martinez, my therapist, helped me understand that their behavior was about their issues, not mine. That's an important realization, I said. I'm glad you have professional support. It made all the difference, Hannah agreed. That and this place. She gestured around at the farmhouse. Having my own space, my own land, making my own decisions. It's been healing in a way I can't quite explain. The next morning, Hannah gave me a tour of the farm's winter operations. The greenhouse was thriving with cold, hardy vegetables. A small barn housed 3 goats Hannah had acquired for milk and cheese production. The renovated outbuilding now served as a classroom space for workshops with colorful educational posters and child-sized gardening tools. "I've made so many connections in the farming community," Hannah told me as we walked. "There's a real network of support here. Danny from the apple orchard helped me set up my first market stand. Miguel from the tomato farm shared his greenhouse design. We trade produce knowledge, even equipment sometimes." It struck me that Hannah was describing something she had been denied in her marriage: genuine reciprocal relationships where her contributions were valued and her needs considered. "Have the Thompsons tried to contact you again?" I asked as we fed the goats. Hannah nodded, scratching behind the ears of the smallest goat, a friendly tan and white female named Poppy. "James calls occasionally. I let it go to voicemail now. He always starts with an apology, then gradually shifts to suggesting what I should be doing with the farm, or hinting that he could help me be more successful." And Patricia and Arthur. They sent a formal letter through an attorney claiming they had left personal property here valued at several $1,000s. I had Sheriff Miller present when my own attorney invited them to provide a detailed list and evidence of ownership. Hannah smiled wryly. Mysteriously, they never responded. "And how did you feel dealing with that on your own?" Hannah straightened up, meeting my eyes directly. "Scared at first, then angry, then honestly powerful. Every time I enforce a boundary and the world doesn't end, I get stronger." That afternoon, Hannah had invited some of her new friends for dinner. I watched with quiet joy as she moved confidently among these people, laughing, sharing stories, offering opinions without constantly checking for approval. These were equal relationships, friendships based on mutual respect rather than power dynamics. Danny, the apple orchard owner, raised a glass in a toast during dinner. "To Hannah, who saved my entire crop with her organic pest management wisdom. My trees have never been healthier." Hannah blushed but accepted the praise without deflecting or diminishing it, a small but significant change. Later that evening, after her friends had left, Hannah and I sat by the fire with mugs of hot cider. "I've been thinking about expanding the educational component of the farm," she said thoughtfully. "A few women from my therapy group expressed interest in spending time here. There's something healing about working with the earth-growing things." "That sounds wonderful," I encouraged. "What are you thinking?" "Maybe a weekend retreat program. Nothing fancy, just a safe space for women recovering from difficult relationships to reconnect with themselves through simple farm work and community." She looked into the fire. "The kind of space I needed when I first left James." "You'd be perfect for that," I said. "You understand what they're going through, and you're living proof that healing is possible." Hannah smiled. "I've started keeping a journal of all the lessons I've learned since the divorce, especially since throwing the Thompsons out. Dr. Martinez suggested it might help to see my progress in writing." "May I ask what some of those lessons are?" Hannah reached for a notebook on the side table. "I actually wrote down the biggest ones, the truths I want to remember even when doubts creep in." She opened the journal and read, "1 Other people's treatment of me reflects their character, not my worth. 2. Setting boundaries isn't selfish. It's necessary for healthy relationships. 3. I deserve to take up space in my own life, to have opinions, to make mistakes. 4. Criticism delivered with, 'I'm just trying to help,' is often still about control, not improvement. 5. Real love empowers. It doesn't diminish. 6. It's never too late to reclaim your voice and your power." I felt tears welling up as she read. These were hard-won truths that many people never learn. "The farm was the catalyst," Hannah continued, closing her journal. "But the real change had to happen inside me. I had to believe I deserved better before I could create better." The next day, Hannah had a special project planned for us. She led me to a sunny spot near the creek that ran through the property. "I want to plant something here," she said, showing me a small sapling carefully wrapped in burlap. "A sugar maple. They live for hundreds of years. I thought we could plant it together as a symbol of new beginnings." We worked side by side, digging the hole, preparing the soil, carefully placing the young tree, and securing it with stakes against winter winds. As we patted the final layer of soil into place, Hannah spoke quietly. I used to think strength meant enduring, tolerating difficult things without complaint. Now I understand that true strength sometimes means saying no, walking away, closing doors that need to be closed. She looked up at the tiny tree, so vulnerable yet full of potential. And then planting something new in the space you've reclaimed. I thought about the day I had closed the door on Patricia Thompson, saying those 3 simple words that marked the end of their influence. Your time's up. It hadn't been just about that moment, but about all the boundaries that should have been established years before. I'm so proud of who you've become, I told Hannah, wrapping an arm around her shoulders as we admired our work. Not because of what you've accomplished with the farm, impressive as that is, but because of how you've reclaimed yourself. Hannah leaned her head against my shoulder, a gesture so reminiscent of her childhood that it made my heart ache with love. I couldn't have done it without you, Mom. You showed me what strength looks like. We showed each other, I corrected gently. As we walked back to the farmhouse, the winter sun casting long shadows across the snow-covered fields, I reflected on our journey. The farm had been a gift from mother to daughter, but the true gift had emerged in unexpected ways. The courage to stand up for yourself, the wisdom to recognize harmful patterns, the strength to close doors that need closing, and the faith to plant new beginnings even in winter. Hannah's story wasn't over, of course. There would be challenges ahead, moments of doubt, perhaps even further confrontations with the Thompsons. But she faced the future now from a place of power, rather than fear, confident in her ability to protect her peace and nurture her growth. As a mother, I couldn't ask for anything more meaningful than seeing my child break free from the constraints that had held her back and step fully into her own light. That was worth every penny of the farm, every moment of confrontation, every difficult conversation. Some might say I interfered too much, that Hannah needed to fight her own battles. But I've come to believe that sometimes loving someone means standing beside them as they find their voice, lending them your strength until they rediscover their own. The art is knowing when to step in and when to step back, a balance I'm still learning. What about you? Have you ever had to stand up to someone who is trying to control or diminish someone you love? Did you find it harder to defend yourself or to defend others? Leave a comment below with your experience. And if this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more real-life stories about family boundaries and finding your strength. Remember, it's never too late to close a door that needs closing or to plant new beginnings. Thank you for listening to my story, and may you find the courage to protect your peace when it matters most.